Hiya! Welcome back to the Book and Lounge podcast. I'm your host, Jacqueline. And in this episode, we have a full house. So we have Yvonne, Annette, Katrina, Taiwo, and Kay, and we are discussing Decolonizing My Body by Afua Hirsh. So, Decolonizing My Body is a memoir and an exploration of beauty standards, heritage, and self-acceptance. It chronicles Afua's year of adornment, starting with her 40th birthday, during which she reconnects with her African heritage to challenge and unlearn colonial patriarchal ideas of purity and beauty. That's a mouthful. Anyway, she combines her personal experience, research, and interviews with beauty experts and reassesses body image beyond Western standards. At least that's what she set out to do. So, let's hear what everybody thought of the book. Hi everyone, it's good to see you all again, and I can see you all raring to go with this book.
Good.
So let's get started. Decolonizing My Body. What did you think of the memoir?
I thought the book was well researched, but I found it very difficult to connect with this book. I think it's largely because I found it slightly disjointed, haphazard, and so lacking focus. And I gave myself plenty of time to read this because normally I'm reading books really quickly, but I kind of read the first chapter. I was like, okay, I'm not getting much. Let's go on to the second one. And I just found it really difficult to engage with it. And I'm surprised because I thought this would be a topic that I would connect with very closely, being a Black woman living in this country. I just found it very difficult to connect with. I would lose my train of thought and I'd have to leave it, then come back to it. And I just didn't even look forward to reading the thing.
I'm glad somebody else started and said roughly along the lines of where I was with this book. I think I came to it aware that the first book that she wrote, I wasn't the biggest fan of that. So I thought, okay, I've got to come to this with an open mind. I've got to give it a chance. But I think your choice of word connect is a good one. I didn't connect with it. And I think sometimes there are books written by certain people that almost popular discourse says I should connect with. But for reasons perhaps we'll get into, I really just didn't. I'm glad that a writer like Afua had the space, the freedom to write a book like this. I doubt if you might have seen a book like this given as much coverage as it was maybe 20, 30 years ago. But Connection's the one, I didn't connect with it either.
Yeah, a little bit similar to Yvonne and Kay. I just felt it was a bit all over the place. She would make some really good points. I think each chapter started off with like, okay, this will be interesting. And then it just went off into something else. And then it'll come back. But then you're so lost in what she was talking about before. It was just hard to find connections between what the tangents that she went on and then everything else that she was talking about. And some of the stuff in there I just couldn't really relate to. I was excited. And then like Kay, like you said, like it's one of those things where I think I'm told that this should be for me. And then I was just like, oh, it's really not.
It doesn't seem to be very well organised. And because of that, I found myself skimming, looking for what's the point of what she's talking about. And I think I missed a lot of it just because I was just sort of like, where is this going? And sort of going up and down on the page. I know you should read properly, but I just couldn't get involved. I thought perhaps, I'm not a Black woman, so maybe that's, an issue for it, but I don't think that's entirely it. It didn't, to me, generalise enough how, I know it's supposed to be about her body, but even so, you expect it to be something that generalises out to people generally, at least to Black ladies, you would think.
I was just about to ask whether, given it's a memoir, it shouldn't be navel-gazing. I mean, it is about her. It's decolonizing my body. Should it not be?
It's a memoir. I wouldn't see it really as a memoir. I see it more as focusing on those aspects of beauty treatment that have impacted her, which, fair enough for me.
The reason why I kind of see it as a memoir is simply because of the title sheet. It does say Decolonizing My Body. So it's about her and her body, and they're trying to decolonize it. But I get your point, and I do agree with everything that you've all said. I was really excited when I started reading the introduction, the prologue, and also the first part, Blood, to see to read what it's about. So when I started reading it, I was really excited. But then she started going off on a tangent on topics that were not related to what the part was actually supposed to be about. So she started bringing in elements of trips that she's taken to different countries, experiences she's had. So in that respect, I absolutely agree. It was very disjointed. And for me, it didn't fulfill the title, Decolonizing My Body, because I didn't see how she was decolonizing her body by what she was writing. It was more about experiences that she's had that sort of loosely relate to the title.
She's going for a moment of reflection. And I think your point about, she shoehorns all these things into it. I did start out getting the sense that she'd come to a point and she wanted to reflect on that. But there were just all these other points as well. And I found myself, like everybody else, getting lost. I have to say, I don't know what it is, but I'm so glad that I'm not the only person who struggled with this, because I was genuinely concerned that I was being too harsh. I think I told you when I saw this book on the list of books we perhaps were going to read. I happened to be on Amazon and I saw there was a sale, and I just bought it because I knew that this book was going to be selected. I just knew it was because of who the writer was, and just, she's going to get through. People are going to vote for that book. But I just, people get to points in their career. Like, it's interesting to me, we've read like Gary Young, and his point of reflection was to look back at all his articles and to try to find some common threads or revisit themes. I could maybe sense that she was trying to do the same. I just couldn't get it. And the point about navel gazing, I did read it at times thinking, this is so self-indulgent. I don't connect in any way.
It's not what I expected it to be, even though I know it is decolonizing my body, the my bit. But like you said, Katrina, there should be like more general points in there as well. But it was just very much about her. And obviously, I know it's great that she's done well, but there was a lot of just like, oh, it's, lucky for you, you get to go lasering and seeing that lady, the spiritual woman. Like, I just don't know. I just kept thinking of how much she's spending all of this fancy stuff, and I just couldn't. I don't know. I just couldn't relate, and some of it I just felt it was a bit unnecessary.
What to say? What to add? I think maybe she's going through a midlife crisis. I mean, because and people's thoughts are sort of haphazard and lacking in focus because you're in a different age. And I mean, this book cost me a good £20. It's not well structured. As I said, it's sort of all over the place.
So Yvonne, what about the beauty of the book? The aesthetics of the book, you're overlooking it.
Yeah, I don't really care about that. I mean, I see there's a few.
Oh, so you accept that it's a beautiful book?
That doesn't redeem the content of the book. Unfortunately not.
So Taiwo, we've all said what we think about the book. I guess if you could just tell us what you think.
I think you're being too harsh.
Okay, why?
Because it's beautiful.
But Taiwo, you can't just rate a book on what it looks like.
You can.
The content
You
also
can judge a book by its cover. But beyond that, don't you think that she's come at this whole topic from a different angle? Okay, fine. I accept fully that it's not a perfect book. Obviously, there's no book that is perfect. But don't you think that she's brought some novel perspectives to these issues? I mean, okay, these are not new issues. The issue of decolonization and how it has affected non-white folk mentally as well as physiologically. But don't you think she's brought something new to the table, even if she has brought it in a way that maybe has not been particularly palatable to most of you.
But what is new? What is new in the contents of the book? Because I didn't see it.
The whole approach, I thought the whole approach was new. The fact that, okay, blood, beauty, sexuality, skin. And I also think that she's on a journey. And when you make a journey, obviously you make mistakes along the way. There may be some dead ends. You have to turn back. Maybe this is one of the books where, you know, unlike maybe British, which I didn't finish reading anyway, she hasn't quite hit the mark. But I still believe that you should try to cut her some slack, basically, rather than just be quite harsh with how you're judging the book, in that there are certain things that she has looked at from maybe a fresh perspective. No one is seeing that. I'm the only one that's seeing that.
I didn't see the freshness. I'm glad like someone's here and offering a different point of view, but I just didn't. I wasn't sure that I wasn't being moved or swayed by anything she was saying. There were moments where I was actively reading it and being quite slightly irked.
I get what she's trying to do and I get what she's trying to say. I just don't think that she said it well. So she's got this book divided into various sections, but she hasn't actually talked about the topic that the section is supposed to be about. She starts off with menstruation, puberty, the whole puberty and coming of age ceremonies that used to happen and why they're important. But actually, she doesn't then dig deeper into that. She just goes on to talk about other random things that shouldn't really appear in that section. The same about skin, the same about beauty. She just kind of brings in other experiences that she's had into those sections that are completely irrelevant. So for me, that's why the book did not work. But otherwise, I was very much interested in reading about her perspective and also the historic. I was very curious about the puberty and coming of age ceremonies that people had. But there was nothing.
Do you think that because she's such a well-known name and everything, that she wasn't given the editing she ought to have or the direction she ought to have? Because that's what I feel with it, that nobody, it's just like, oh, this will sell. It's got a title that'll sell. It's by an author who'll sell. And if she'd been properly edited so that somebody to focus her down a little bit, it could have turned out to be a lot better. I can see that. Yes.
So she kind of starts this book after an experience that she's had on a program that she was working on, the Pledge. And that then led her to an event where she meets Oprah Winfrey, who then tells her, because she's struggling after this appearing on the panel on this program, because as an activist, she just feels that she's fighting a losing battle, because no matter how much she tries to change people's views of Black people, she's never really able to make any impact. And so she's told by Oprah Winfrey to strengthen her spiritual muscle. And then that's how this book starts off. And then she comes up with terminology that as minority groups from the diaspora, we suffer from what terms as ancestral deficiency syndrome. I just wanted to explore that.
So is that an actual term, like ancestral deficiency syndrome? Is that something that somebody has uttered before she wrote it? Or is that something she came up with? It's funny because I remember that show, The Pledge. I remember seeing that a couple of times and then just having to stop watching it because it was so... You could see what it was pandering to. There was a period of time where there was these whole shows which were like marketing themselves as a discussion, but were clearly just let's just mudsling and get ratings. That's what it felt like. The arguments felt reductive. That bit of the book, it was interesting to hear those reflections, because I do remember seeing her give a couple of interviews, or not interviews, she was like a talking head on particular shows, like she was brought on to commentate. Like I remember a particular interview with Piers Morgan, and he just shouted her down in a way that was actually quite uncomfortable to watch. It was really all about him. She was just bait there to go on the show and give him something. So when it got to that bit, those kind of reflections and hearing that she was trying to offer up something more, but she didn't feel like she could. Again, maybe this goes back to the other point about editing. I didn't quite get what that was to do with decolonizing my body. Maybe that was her discovery. If she tried things, she thought she was doing something well, and she came back to it and she felt it wasn't. I could see from a mile off, just watching those shows and being no particular expert, that she was being used, she was convenient, clearly wasn't there wasn't no depth required from her. It was just making up the numbers. On the ancestral deficiency, the reason I asked is that something she's just noticed herself and she's just claimed, or is this an actual identified, studied phenomena? I do wonder if there is something in distance from your elders, and I don't think it's the way maybe your elders or your grandparents would have done things in a particular way. I do wonder about that, and it's something I think about myself when I connect with my grandparents, or my grandparents from the Caribbean, I go back to the Caribbean, and you look at a different way of life and you think, what if?
I googled it, I didn't find anything relating to it, so I think it's a term that she's come up with.
Yeah, she said she made it up herself.
Okay, she does say that. I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is what she describes it as. So she says, for millennia, people have developed and passed down ancient knowledge systems that offer a cohesive way to initiate us through stages of our lives, that help us to tap into not just our physicality, but also our divinity. The nagging sense that each one of us has, that our consciousness as humans destines us to be more than the sum of our bodies. She does go on to say that because we've been uprooted, and also because of colonialism and the denigration of our religions and our practices, we've kind of been cut off from our ancestors. And that's therefore is why we suffer from ancestral deficiency syndrome.
Sometimes families are not, some families, are very cultural, and they will pass on the traditions to the next generation, and some are not. I mean, it's a little bit like language, especially if you live in the UK, and I'm from Zimbabwe. So some of my cousins who've grown up here can speak Shona because their parents have encouraged them and tried to. Then there are many, many other cousins who cannot.
Yeah, and I agree. Like when you said this ancestral deficiency program, I was like, syndrome. I was like, who has it? It's like a label she's just given people or given us. I haven't said I'm suffering from any issue. Like you said, some things just carry on and some things do not. I don't know. I just felt maybe it's just me and I don't think that deeply about it or certain things compared to she does. It makes it seem like by her using that term, it just makes it seem that there's an inherent problem of people in the diaspora. I don't know. I didn't really like it. If that's an issue you have, fine. But I feel very strong for who I am.
Yeah, but Annette, that's you. I kind of do think that there's a lot of us who are lost.
Yeah. No, I know. I just didn't like that she made up a word for it. I don't know. Maybe it's just.
Say for me as a white person, I don't think I have any great sort of, in these issues she's talking about, I don't see any great influence from my grandmothers and so on, because I think things evolve and we all change at the time. I think the point she's making is that her family, it would seem, have to some extent, there's this interruption that's come because they've taken on the idea that the education, etc., that's come with colonialism is more important than the culture. So it's cut in across instead of them just evolving naturally. I think that's the point she's making, and I get it. But I spent some time trying to think about it from the point of view of myself as a white person and thinking, well, I don't know what I've inherited that I would want to carry on in things like menstrual practices or something. I think they've evolved in a very much more hygienic way from how they were in the past with my great-grandparents, shall we say. But it's a natural evolution, isn't it?
Is it just about the physical element, though? Isn't there like a spiritual element that she's talking about? This idea that you have puberty ceremonies where you teach girls about puberty, about menstruation, and about once you start menstruating, you've now come of age, and then they pass on all these secrets on to you. Isn't that?
Yes, I get that. And I mean, I'm just thinking from my point of view, I don't think whatever those secrets were, they were lost so many generations ago that it's irrelevant to my family. But it's a natural process of evolution. Whereas the decolonizing thing is presumably to do with the fact that you've lost those things unnaturally and you might want to reclaim them, which makes absolute sense. I've got no issue with that at all.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add, I think that point you make, Katrina, about things being lost naturally and unnaturally. I think that's just one thing my mum always says is like, do you even know who your ancestors are? Which I kind of get sometimes where she's coming from, because she's even like, back, she doesn't know. I'm just wondering, when my mum didn't wear waist beads, I don't think my grandma's ever mentioned her wearing waist beads, nor did my great-grandmother. So I don't know if maybe just within my line, it wasn't a thing, or it could have been cut off naturally or unnaturally. I don't know. The way the term was said, it was kind of made me feel bad about something that I no longer carry on, but neither did my mum or my grandmother or my great-grandmother. And I don't know if I can say that was down to colonialism or just something that we didn't do. So I don't know. I think maybe that's why I was just a little bit annoyed by it, but I get where she's coming from at the same time.
So then would you, if you had a daughter, would you take your daughter to a puberty ritual ceremony, to someone like Lorenz?
No, I'll just tell her how to use the sanitary towel tampon and leave it at that. Like I'll explain obviously how these things come to be, but it's not me. I wouldn't do that, no.
Yeah, short answer, definitely not.
There is a point she's talking about care. I can't remember the exact words, but she talks about this is a time to rest for a woman. And actually that hasn't been recognised. I think that's an interesting point, but there's actually a broader conversation going on about that at the moment, linked to women's health and what attention has been given to women's health and this kind of evolution in understanding women's body and what's going on at that time. And this is more coming to the fore, and these are things we need to be thinking about. That bit I absolutely understood. My response to that wouldn't be to go and see a woman with beautiful dark skin and wrapped hair, is so beautiful, and I spent time with her. That's the bit she lost me.
But I mean, just talking about that issue about listening to your body, I mean, I got it, but I mean, the whole thing was we're not resting enough. And I was thinking to myself, if you're working Monday to Friday and you've got to be in London at sort of 8 a.m. and finish at 6 or whatever, Monday to Friday, I mean, can you literally just call HR and say, I'm resting for the next 3 days? You can't. So, I mean, I found it a bit indulgent, actually, this part, because I felt that, yes, we would all like to slow down in during this period, this cycle, but it's not realistic.
But I think what she's trying to say is that as a society, we've made it unrealistic. We should really be, giving our bodies a rest. We should be nurturing ourselves. But because of the way society is, because women have had to fight to get into the workplace, to be given equal rights, we've sort of been afraid to ask for these opportunities where actually we can stay at home if you're not feeling 100%. Isn't she just trying to challenge society and society's views rather than just being self-indulgent and saying call HR, don't go to work? I think she's making a broader point of challenging society and how society treats women who are menstruating.
But she has not articulated it well, I'm afraid.
It's funny you mentioned that point around leave, because I think there are some places where you can now request leave on the basis of time of the month. I think there was a story in Spain. Don't quote me on this. I'll Google it in a minute. This is something people have talked about, and I don't see the link to colonialism exactly in this area. Or maybe there is one, I just haven't quite understood it. I think that's something to do with women more generally.
Mm-hmm.
What you're talking about the role of
Ron's
women
point
in
about
society.
the economic reality of, if you need to go out and earn for your family, you don't have the luxury of taking time off. If you're on a 0-hour contract, no work, no pay. So that's when it all starts to sound a little bit, is she thinking realistic? From whose experience is she speaking here?
I wanted to say that, would any of you agree that because you have, for various reasons, rightly or wrongly, taken against the author of this book, that therefore you tend not to necessarily give her a bit of a chance. Because, I mean, for example, in the way that Jackie just explained, that she wasn't saying that because a woman's having a period and, she's drained or whatever, she'd be able to take time off work. She's saying, wouldn't it be nice? She's raising it as a question. And I agree with Kay that she's not the first person to raise it. And I, too, have seen that some companies do have that, some of those kind of write-on companies where you no longer have a job title, you call yourself what you want, or there's a flat structure whereby everyone gets paid the same thing. All those kind of innovative ways of looking at work and how we do work. I'm not saying that the whole idea of being able to take time off because you're having a heavy period is necessarily going to catch on. But there would have been a time in the Western society where working 7 days a week was the norm, and people would have said, you trying to take a day off, Saturday, Sunday, weekend, or even annual holiday is unrealistic. In the same way that people are saying nowadays that the 4-day working week, as the Tories said previously, is unrealistic. But society is changing. So I think it's part of the contribution to this societal change that she is trying to add to, even if she's maybe done it in a cock-handed way. But the point I wanted to make, really, putting that also one side, is that colonization itself, that you're now decolonizing from, it's not a one-way street, is it? So as the white man went over to the African continent and other places and colonized the people and affected the people by virtue of being there and changing customs and tradition and culture, so he too, or she too, were affected. So I view the book as she has this kind of rosy idea of some kind of African utopia, but were she to go back to Ghana or some part of the African continent, a lot of these customs, traditions, rituals that she is seeking for in this book, or she's trying to seek for in this book, have morphed, have changed. As Annette was saying, or as Katrina was saying, some have died out entirely because societies don't stand still, do they? They're dynamic. So in the same way that things have been changing in the West, things have also been changing on the African continent.
And that's what you took from reading this?
No, I didn't. What I did is that I think what we're doing now is it's because these are topics that we ourselves are passionate about. So we really digging deep and we're taking isolated ideas and we're extrapolating them ourselves. If you read the book and if we go back to the book, no, that's not what I'm getting from the book.
How I saw the relation between what she was talking about there, the menstruation, the puberty rituals and so on, I saw that she was saying that back in the day we had all these things, and because of colonization and Christianity, it was kind of cut off because of that. And so she's basically just trying to link the practices that we had in the past to practices we have today. I guess that's how I saw the link with Decolonizing My Body. I don't think she did it well. I wish she'd actually just focused and then gone deeper into it. But that, for me, is the message that I saw that she was trying to put across. The second part of the book is called Beauty. And I was quite surprised that she chose body hair. She chose to talk about body hair. Did you know anything about what she wrote about? Because I didn't. I just really never thought about body hair.
Well, I think I said this book club when she was talking about people in Ghana love body hair. That was news to me because I don't see it. And like I said, that's when I voice noted my mum a lot during this book because I was partly confused. Then also attacking my mother for not telling me things. My mum was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like even my mum was a bit like, leave me out of this. But she said, okay, maybe the body hair thing might have been when your grandma was young or maybe when I was young. But my mum was like, to say that now, people would love to see body hair. She's like, no. So that was news to me because I've not really seen that. I think when I was younger, when I first went there, I remember my cousins had like hair on their legs, and I guess that's not something because my family is not very hairy. I don't know what the right term is to say, but they had it and they weren't too fussed. So that was quite a surprise to me. But then as I've gone there over the years, they don't like, I think they just shave their legs, but that would have been like the only bit of like kind of body hair I've sort of seen. But I'm not for me, when growing up, my I guess my mum was not, she would just tell me to shave if there was any body hair, but we're not very like a hairy sort of family. But that's how I've just been brought up, to just not show any body hair if I did have any. But yeah, that statement is very sweeping, because I have not seen any body hair like that in Ghana.
Did she not say parts of Ghana though?
Okay, I've travelled. I haven't seen it.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, I was surprised that, I mean, I don't know much about the culture in Ghana, but I was surprised that body hair is celebrated, and women actually walk around displaying their, you know, if they have any, they will display it because it's something to be admired. So I assumed that that was a thing. But I was surprised because about this, you know, when she was talking about beauty, and then she starts talking about laser treatment. But then she starts talking about Zizi and her council flat, which sort of kind of got me a bit confused. And then I guess I get the historical, and I suppose that's the part where you can see that she's done some research on Sheba and King Solomon. But as I was saying, it sort of veers all over the place. And then you just don't understand what the point is. This is what I was trying to understand about her laser treatment, because it sort of starts there, doesn't it, really?
Well, isn't the point that she's trying to make that as a society now, we don't like body hair. We spend a great deal of money trying to remove it. But
So that's Western society.
Well, Western society. Thank you for the correction. So we spend a lot of money trying to remove it. But actually, back in the day, up until Charles Darwin, body hair wasn't an issue. It was Charles Darwin who basically said about us being very close to, I think, apes or chimps, because they have a lot of body hair. And then people started revolting against that. Then they started shaving. And then also this American guy who invented body hair removal cream, who then made a whole load of money from it. And it was commercialized. But I guess what she's trying to say is she's trying to challenge her mentality and her views towards body hair and how we see body hair as a society. For me, that's where I saw the decolonising of came from. She's challenging, actually, you know, we spend all this money on removing our body hair, but actually it's natural. Why are we doing it?
I mean, you've articulated it well, but that's not how that chapter is articulated. That's where I have a slight issue with it. I get the point, but I mean, with all these topics, I mean, we sort of understand where she's coming from. We get it, but the execution is poor. And that's why we take these and we extrapolate it ourselves to make meaning of it. But that's not directly what we're getting from the book.
Yeah. But isn't it the author's job then to make things very blatant and very clear for you to just take it and read it and then straight to the point?
Yes, but the thing about body hair, I mean, fashions come and go with things like that. But if you take it back to like feminist thought and Germaine Greer, weren't they all busy rebelling against leg shaving and stuff like that? You know, this is not really a new thing that as women, we're brainwashed, certainly in the West, into thinking we have to have smooth legs and all the rest of it. But it's not really a new thing that she's talking about.
Yeah, I agree. And wasn't there a time when celebrities weren't like shaving, female celebrities weren't shaving their underarm hair, and there was discussion. Like it's not anything new. I feel like it was just a chapter, but I had to tell us that she's getting laser hair removal treatment. Like that's what it was. That's how I saw it. Because wasn't that also the chapter when she spoke about the jinn or something in her
chapter? That's how the whole thing starts.
But what did the jinn have to do with the hair?
That's the whole point.
It was like, I was like, okay, this is interesting, but what's this got to do with you? What's this got to do with hair? And then you're going to get, so the lady that does your laser hair treatment went through this thing in her council flat. But what's this got to do with anything else? I honestly just felt like she was just telling us this is a beauty treatment that she's getting. And she tried to connect it to something from the past. But also, like you said, Katrina, this is just a topic that has been discussed amongst, like, in feminism, like, theoretical feminism has been for years and years and years. So and nothing new. Interesting points. Again, she brings up interesting points, but nothing new. We'll continue to talk about it. If you want to get laser hair treatment, do it.
Who do you think she's writing for?
She's writing for herself.
No, but beyond herself. I think because we touched on at the beginning that were we supposed to like this, but we somehow didn't. We just didn't find the connection. Now that I'm just quickly like going through some of the pages again and some of the cultural references, you know, she touches on Bella Hadid and Kendall Jenner. I'm actually now wondering who this book is really written for. It's got the Oprah Winfrey aura about it. Here is a very informed woman who's going to introduce you and tell you about all these things. But I wonder if actually we're just not the audience for this book.
Okay, you may have a point, because there are quite a number of references about the Kardashians.
Yeah, as a kind of a standard reference point, which I just, oh really? Okay, all right, next.
She may be aiming for a much, much younger audience, and therefore we've missed the point.
A little bit.
If I can just mansplain.
I really see what you're trying to do with your questions, Jackie, and I love your commitment, Taiwo, but I think you're maybe talking to the wrong group of people. This isn't for informed readers, people who have maybe reflected on these things. Perhaps people who've experienced these things and are thinking about them deeply. This is an introduction to spiritual mumbo jumbo for beginners. Do you know what I mean?
Hey! Mumbo jumbo a bit. Oh wow!
I truly think that you're all not sufficiently middle class to really understand this book.
And I think that could be part of it as well.
I thought we were too middle class to understand it.
Okay. Swiftly moving on. She looks at Europe, especially when it's coming to body hair and tattoos. Then she looks at South America, and then she looks at part of Africa. How does she say that beauty trends have evolved in the last 100 years or so?
She's not talking about the Eurocentric beauty standards as being kind of the norm all over the world, as in Western Europe and America having great cultural sway over the globe, exporting their standards. So the standard of straight hair, the standard of fair skin, if you're light, then it's supposed to be considered more attractive or more beautiful than a dark complexion.
Does she mention skin though and skin colour in the book? Because I thought she didn't.
Well, she didn't really go into colorism and where it's come from and why it exists. So as Yvonne was saying, maybe I've just extrapolated from my reading of the book into that.
No, I think she talked more about the shape of the nose and the fact that a lot of the people were going all over, to different parts of the world to get their that reconstruction of the nose. And then she mentions that one of the moms and how people are actively removing the silicone that's in there. There's a movement towards going back to who you were. I must admit, on beauty, there was this thing made reference about pink tax, which I hadn't actually thought about. And I thought, actually, there's a point here. Because she talks about how women have to be professional housewives, they have to have their professional careers. But then there's this whole thing about, there's a tax on beauty, and women pay more for their skin lotions and it's quite costly, and women do spend tons of money without thinking. So I thought that was quite interesting, the reference to what she calls pink tax. I don't know if it's a new concept, but I thought that.
But was there not some kind of movement to remove that on tampons and all of that? So I think that in itself has been going on for a while. But I understand the stats that you've mentioned, because I think she said something like over the course of their lifetime, the average British woman spends 23,000 on hair removal alone and 70,000 on her appearance. So the amount of money that we actually spend is staggering. And the thing about having to be a professional housewife, She basically says that, and the thing is the quote from Naomi Wolf, where she says that the beauty myth is basically women take on all roles at once, and so you have to be a professional housewife, a professional careerist, and a professional beauty. So we spend a lot of our money and time not only doing the housework, working, and but also on top of that, we kind of like have to make ourselves look beautiful. So and I got all of that, but then the evolving beauty standards, she did make the point that although there was a movement to look more European, more Western, actually there's now a movement the other way where people are getting butt lifts and getting, for me, I guess from that beauty thing, I just kind of saw a history of how society's views have changed. I didn't see how necessarily that was her decolonizing her body, and I didn't quite relate.
I think she mentions that when she was in school, when she was younger, she was encouraged to be really slim and all this, and then the freedom. I think when she went to Ghana, or she was in Ghana, and actually she was saying something about how an auntie would say, "You're not fat enough." As in, and it's quite freeing, the fact that yes, you're allowed to be as big as you want to be, and that's celebrated. So I'm wondering if, I don't know what the connection is, but
so is the point that she simply raises questions which she doesn't necessarily answer. She's asking, why does she think that she needs to be a certain weight or a certain way of looking? And then she's kind of boiling it down to, well, the society in which she has been raised has a Eurocentric or a certain aesthetic of looking at, this is what an ideal woman should look like. This is how an ideal woman should be. So it's that question of who determines what the ideal is, and how over time, I guess it changes, doesn't it? Because there would have been a time in Edwardian times when women were supposed to be quite curvaceous, whereas now, or maybe in the 90s, she was talking about the whole grunge and heroin chic and all that kind of stuff, where you're supposed to have no real body shape, but to be very, very thin, size 0, and how it changes over time. But if you live long enough, you see it come back in fashion again eventually. So I guess she's just saying that it's all artificial, I guess.
And also, is she also saying that she's also now conscious of this, whereas maybe previously she just took everything that she was basically told growing up in a Western society, but actually now she's conscious of it and she can challenge it if she wants to.
But she doesn't seek to provide solutions, does she? She simply, I guess, the purpose of her book is to raise the question, to bring about an awareness, but not necessarily to answer the question, but just to pose it.
Yeah. So she also talks about sexuality, and for me, the sexuality section is the one that I guess I kind of struggled with the most. And that's where she was talking about waist beads, and also her trip to Morocco and meeting this woman who was taking the pictures and all of that. That's the section that I struggled with the most to relate to her and her decolonizing her body. That's also where she meets the photographer who's taking pictures based on a book that was written by, I think, an Algerian male writer about women and eroticism.
I enjoyed reading about the beads because obviously I'm not from West Africa, so this is, and Southern Africa, we don't wear beads, so I don't know enough about beads and all that. So that was interesting, but honestly, I think then she goes to Morocco, the whole thing goes downhill because she is now all over the place, and she meets the weavers, and I just couldn't understand the context. I couldn't understand what she was trying to tell us about sexuality. The only thing I picked up in Morocco was some sort of empowerment of women, if anything, but I was like, what has this got to do with sexuality? It was just really confusing me. Really confusing.
Was she combining the fact that those Moroccan weavers had formed almost like a commune, and the fact that they had financial liberation because they were economically active, meant that I think some of them had chosen not to marry. So I think she was trying to link the whole issue of the institution of marriage to an economic reason why some of those women would have married in the first place, rather than...
But that was literally a small paragraph out of the entire chapter, which refers to the fact that, that's why I said, yes, they're empowered. And one, Khadija, who's in her 40s, has never married or had children, and she's calm and peaceful. Yeah, very difficult to connect.
No, I just wanted to ask you generally, do you think if she had not used the prism of colonialism, but she'd used the prism of the patriarchy, that the book would have been more... No? Okay, just trying.
I don't think so.
Wonder, maybe, yeah, like if it was, again, just skimming through some of these, they read like those opinion pieces where somebody picks up a topic and then they just run with it wherever their mind takes them. If this was just an essay about her observations on, maybe that could have been the common thread for all of them. But I think she's given it this quite provocative title, Decolonizing My Body, and in a way that almost sets the tone for what you're expecting to read. So a lot of what's been said about, is this a social comment piece? I don't quite understand those references she's making. Is she talking about herself? But is she trying to say this is the experience? It maybe goes back to that earlier point around editing. It just needed somebody to edit and go, okay, and what's the point?
Because I think I have problem with, yes, there's the title itself, but there's the different headings. Like if you say sexuality, then, I need to read something that relates to the title. You can't talk about waist beads and then you sort of veer off in all sorts of directions, and no, you can't. Change the title. Make it My Random Thoughts and My Travels.
So false advertising.
Then we don't have these high expectations, because it's quite frustrating. I found it really frustrating reading this book.
But Yvonne, she does talk about the anti-homosexuality movement in Africa. She does talk about the view,
but not in a coherent way. It doesn't flow, Jackie.
If she's saying she's been to this place in Africa and that place and the other place, and they've made her reflect upon her sexuality, or she's maybe drawn those ideas into her own thing, the way she wants to live, or something like that, she's not articulating that very well. That could be a valid thing to discuss, and that would be more relevant to decolonizing in a certain sense if she's replacing perhaps what she feels are colonial ideas with these other ideas. But it's not explained. And I know, Jackie, you said, do we have to have it spelt out? But seemingly we do. I think the title sexuality is there just because when people flip through the book and they say, oh, there's going to be sex, good. Well, that'll be something interesting to read about. There's nothing about sex in it as far as I'm concerned. There's a few things about marriage and not being married and that. There's not much about what I call sex, but never mind.
Katrina, there's a discussion on porn. There's a discussion on eroticism. There's a discussion on views of the 19th century views of women and pleasure. I agree, it's not coherent, and it's not, perhaps there's not enough of it, but she does cover sexual.
Fair enough. I may have forgotten some of it, but that is because I'm saying that we're forgetting part of it is because it wasn't laid out in a way that was easy to grasp. It doesn't have to be even easy to grasp, but you have to have an argument that follows. And if you keep meandering off into other directions, then unfortunately the reader lost that bit. And I'm sorry if I lost something important there.
Yeah, for this genre of writing, you do need a bit of a path. Your challenge, I thought, was a fair one. Does everything need to be spelt out for you? And I'm thinking the books where you want a bit of mystery or you want to be able to make things up, like novels or stories where, you know, things are left unsaid. But this is like first person experience. And she's given it this strong title. This is a particular genre of writing. You are looking for something which is a bit more coherent. And I did hear your question earlier, Taiwo. And what you missed at the beginning is I said that I really tried to come to this with an open mind. I did try. I really did try. And I feel like in some ways, if this wasn't written by Afua Hirsh, I wonder whether we would have written this off quite quickly earlier. But it's almost, it's that double-edged sword of, because of who she is, she's allowed to write like this and it be published. And because of who she is, she'll attract attention. People will be paying, you know, more closely. So I'm trying not to be the, oh, it's Afua Hirsh. I'm not a particular fan, but I appreciate that somebody like her was given space to kind of write this, but it is lacking in there. It's not coherent. So I keep finishing thinking, so what is she trying to say?
So then, do you feel that you learned anything from reading this book? I did. For example, the tattoos. I didn't really know much about tattooing. I didn't know about scarification and body art. And I didn't also know about the racism that exists within the tattoo industry. So for me, that was very eye-opening. I didn't even know the methods that you can have, you know, the machine treatment, or you could actually have it done by needles and pricking. So there's a lot about that for me was very eye-opening and educational. So then, given what you think about the book, do you feel that there was any value in what she's written?
There are, yeah. And the reason I would like these sorts of books in general is because you do learn something. But for example, the bit I'm left wondering now is, it was quite interesting to me to read the bits about West Africa and Ghana, but I've heard someone here with direct connections to Ghana who spent time there is telling me I don't recognise this. So now I'm left wondering, okay, maybe I need to speak to someone from Morocco as well, just to sense check what's being said about Morocco. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think I've learned something, but now I'm not sure I have actually. Look, I'm second guessing myself. Yes, maybe I did. Maybe there are some things I've never thought about, and I'm thankful that she's introduced me. But maybe she was just the introduction. And if I want to really feel like I've learned something about it, I'm probably going to have to go somewhere else.
The notes were quite extensive, weren't they? Where she kind of acknowledged where a lot of the information that she got came from. So you could still source a lot of the material from the notes if you're really interested in particular things that she is asserting, to see whether they can be verified or not.
No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
The bit I took away, and I haven't followed it up yet, but I will, is that she mentioned this man who'd been the last man who'd been actually transported as a slave, and an interview with him that somebody else what's the name of the lady? I should know the name of the lady who's written it.
Zora Neale Hurston.
Yes, that she wrote a book based on interviews with him or something. I will be following that up, and I think I learnt that I'd never heard of this book before, so I'm very pleased to know that.
The tattooing I enjoyed because I'm interested in that, and like Kay said, it's out there. I knew about the different techniques, and I kind of known a bit about racism in the industry because I've actually watched a few documentaries on it, and because I'm wanting to get a tattoo myself, I've done my research. It's not exactly brand new information, but because I'm interested in that, I liked reading about it. Other than that, I learned that there are people that do things, but I didn't gain anything from that. So like Lorenz, I now know there are Lorenzes. That's it. I don't need to know any more than that. I know that there are Lorenzes. I don't actually, even from reading a book, I don't know what she gained from it. I genuinely don't know what she gained from doing that whole.
So you were not convinced to go and see Lorenz?
Not at all. No, I could have all the money in the world. I would not go and see Lorenz. I don't know what she got out of it. I'm still going to have my period next month. I'm probably still going to have cramps. Now what? Like, I don't understand what I was meant to get out from that. So yeah, I think just the tattooing and reading about the man that Zora Neale Hurston had interviewed.
Because of her previous book and because of who she is, she's able to have this platform. So like any author, it's not every book that an author produces that is going to be Pulitzer Prize winning. not every book is a good book, just in the same way that a film director, not every film is a commercially successful film or even artistically successful. So if this is a dud book, which I don't agree that it is, but if it is a dud book, then she should have the right to, publish a dud book, just like any white male author.
But was British a dud book? I haven't finished really.
I didn't finish reading it.
Okay. I also, just to say, I think that's it now for me. I'm not going to read any more that Afua writes. Unless it's in a paper or something, fine. But in book form, I'm okay now.
For me, I just felt that this whole idea of the diaspora, this whole idea of, there are many people in the diaspora, the African diaspora, and they have all these unique experiences, and they're not all the same. And in the same way, I think that she should have viewed the fact that people that have never left the African continent and will never leave the African continent, they're not all going to be the same either. They're going to have all kinds of experiences, just in the same way that we have all kinds of experiences. And their experiences are going to be unique to having stayed in one place. Our experiences, maybe because many of us, we flip between these two places, children of two worlds. And so our experiences can be quite unique. Those of us that have never been to the African continent or maybe the Caribbean, and maybe we'll never go there, our experiences also will be unique. But she doesn't seem to take on board the fact that there was never this utopia in Africa. But she seems to almost romanticize how, customs, traditions, and culture, as if it's set in stone, as if it doesn't seem to change, but it does. So she seems to be looking back to Africa, as her partner would have said, Sam would have said, you're looking for something that maybe was never lost in the first place. And you're looking to Africa, but it was never there. It was never there.
I think there is something I liked about the book, and it was Sam. Any reference to Sam seemed like a solid, sensible young man. So that's what I liked about the book. I mean, even the last chapter on death. So she's talking, and I'm just carrying on from what Katrina was saying about, they were talking about slavery and the fact that the rituals around how you have funerals, and it's not, you don't just sort of discard someone. And then she was making reference to Brazil and the fact that they were just sort of having bodies and in the trash bin like we would with any other rubbish. But then she quickly veers towards, Sam and I are now rushing to a play in New York City because I'm a guest of Samuel L. Jackson. And I'm like, okay, what are we doing now? Can we just not walk through this, think this through properly? Oh, he wants to have a Starbucks, but then we might be late because we are guests and we'll be sitting right at the front, and he might notice if we are not there. I'm like, what now? It's all sort of like...
Maybe that's how I felt a bit are you just named...
I know Rihanna, I met her, I've travelled... that sort of thing. I don't want to walk away thinking you've just kind of name dropped, but you've not.
Yvonne, have you met Oprah? Have you met Rihanna? Are you on speed dial to them? Don't be named.
Okay, point taken. Well, you don't need to write a whole book about that. Write an article about who you've met in the last 20 years.
So, Yvonne, you mentioned death and the final chapter about death. So she does talk about death rituals in Africa. And what she says is that we like doing death well. We spend more time or more money on the dead than we do on the living. Why is dying well important to African communities?
I think she's specifying, though, isn't she? She's specifying Ghana in particular, because this is not I don't believe it's an African thing, as in the whole continent. I think it's very unique to Ghana. Annette can...
She says, for Africans, from almost all the thousands of societies and cultures on the continent, dying well and being buried properly, observing proper rites of ancestral transcendence is one of the most important parts of life. She's talking about death and dying in Africa.
Yeah, but doing it well and then kind of going overboard. The illustration that she gave was a Ghanaian example, wasn't it? Because I think Annette will correct me if I'm wrong. Ghanaians have this particular thing about when it comes to death and the amount of money that they can spend on marking a person's death.
So do Nigerians, though. Nigerians will keep a body in a mortuary. Yes, they do. I have personal experience of people I know whose fathers
not to that
have
extent. Not to the extent that Ghanaians do it. I mean, we're more into weddings than.
No. 6 months. 6 months, because they collect money to go and bury the dad. So Nigerians do it as well. I know even more than one family who've done that. My neighbor, at the beginning of this year, went to bury his father. His father died in August. He only went to bury him in January because they were collecting money. They wanted it to be a big thing. So I don't think it's just in Ghana.
Maybe it's a West African thing because, I mean, you get buried within 3 to 5 working days and then that's it.
That's right.
In Zimbabwe, that was.
I will say weddings are funerals are a big thing in Ghana. I do think also it depends on the tribe. So like my dad is Ashanti, my mum isn't. So to be honest, my mum does not like going to funerals of my dad, if it's on his side, because it's a whole affair. So much money spent. She just finds it. Even my dad finds it long. Whereas on my mum's side, that's it. Like the mortuary thing is true. You may be in a mortuary for a very long time.
We like to send people off well. Yvonne, I agree with you. In East Africa, we don't have dead bodies lying around in mortuaries for months. You're buried within 2 to 3 days. Yes, you do have a huge funeral where everybody comes. I think she's talking of giving a good send-off. Why is that important?
You and Yvonne can probably correct me because I'm thinking more of East Africa and it might apply more generally, I'm not sure. But is part of the thing about the send-off, I mean, you're actually sending somebody into, okay, I knew it's a transition, but as an ancestor, they're still going to be, in olden tradition anyway, important within your family. So obviously you're going to do it properly because they're not really gone, are they? The ancestor is there. If you think of the traditional way of referring to ancestors, you know, they're still part of the family. So to me, that's why it's important that if you haven't done the funeral arrangements properly and any subsequent ceremonies that you might do in the next few months, years, obviously your ancestor might not be very pleased with you. And that's important because that might impact on the family. A lot of people still take that fairly seriously in some parts of the world anyway.
But you don't want any negative spiritual connotation, so therefore you want to do it in a decent and dignified way. But at the same time, the burial and the funeral really is not for the dead, it's for the living, isn't it? So you also want to raise the status of your family when you're burying your dearly beloved, deceased or late person, to show to the community that you are able to do something in a dignified way.
Talking about death and burial and all of that, it kind of brought to mind where we bury people. So here we have graveyards where everybody's pretty much buried together. Back in the day, you used to be buried in a church graveyard. But in Uganda, you're buried on the family land. And I just wondered, why is it that in European countries, you're buried in a graveyard somewhere far away, whereas in other groups and communities, you're actually buried where the family's at?
But in the old days, that graveyard wasn't far away, was it? It was your village church just nearby where you're all living. But it's only as societies have got so much, like say here in England anyway, people have moved into towns and the pressure of people that they've done that. If you went back to our more traditional way of life as English people, you were just buried down the road with all the other, all your family. Because if you want to, if you're interested in family research and things, you go back to a graveyard, you won't just find one person, you'll probably find a whole number of families going back a few generations if you're lucky. But that was the tradition. They weren't far away from you. Now, of course, they are.
So it's more the pressure on the land that's kind of driven that, rather than it just being how people have done things.
There have been moments throughout history, thinking about this country, where large numbers of people have died at a particular time. If you think like wars and disease and whatever have taken people out, then the quick thing would have been to just keep people in one place, or to bury people in a particular location as well. But I'm just speculating there. But your point about land, actually, it reminded me of like the elders of my family, like particularly my grandparent generation. Even when they came to this country, the plan for many of them was always going to be the body to be sent back home to be buried. And that definitely happened in one or two cases. But after that, the economics of the situation took over.
Mm-hmm.
So is that the actual body, or is that the ashes to be sent back home?
The body. The body. They would go back and they'd be buried on what was the family's land in Antigua, for example. Like my grandmother and actually she didn't die in this country, she died in Jamaica, but she wasn't buried where in the town that she died. Like she lived in Montego Bay, but the body was taken to Mandeville because that was where the family land was. But I think in recent years, it's just become a very expensive endeavour. Maybe that connection with the land has been lost with perhaps the younger you are slightly. And if for those that have spent more time in this country, being accessible to family members has been more important than going back home. So I think those things have evolved for lots of reasons.
Maybe back in the day, cremation wasn't so much a thing. Whereas now, also, when you have ashes are much easier to transport from one continent to another and cheaper.
I know, like, particularly for, like, in my family, for a long time, the body being cremated was a bit frowned upon. You bury the body, you don't cremate it. Yeah. But recently, again, more younger members of the family have been cremated. So I wonder is that something anybody else recognises? That kind of frowning upon of being cremated, but actually as time has gone by, more people are willing to entertain that.
Yeah, I've still been told I'm not allowed to be cremated, so I'm just gonna stick with no. There's been no good. I don't know what the reason is. It's just like you said. There's like a frown. There was an actual frown on my mother's, like, we don't cremate. So because I'm not used to that, I was like, oh, that's a shock, because it's just not something that we do. But overall, it is frowned upon in our family to be cremated. I don't know why. It just is. But with the sending bodies back, my dad went to a funeral. He's back in Ghana. He went to a funeral yesterday. And it was a school friend. His wife had passed away. They live in America. She's 70, and she had said, I think she's been unwell for a while, so I think she might have known, look, if I pass away, this is what you need to do. She said, I want to be buried next to my mum. So they flew her body back to Ghana, and she's been buried next to her mother. Same with my mum's uncle, so my great uncle. He was in a morgue for quite a while. I felt a bit bad. His wife passed away in Croydon, and they buried her in Croydon, and I think they should have been buried together, but it was a whole political thing. They then sent his body back to Ghana, even though he actually doesn't have that much family there anymore, but that's what his kids wanted. And so, funny enough, I was asking my mum yesterday, like, look, if she's still here, if you die now, what do we do? And she's like, oh, you're not leaving me here. I was like, how are we going to, it's thousands. She goes, don't worry, I've got the money. She's like, I've got the money. I am not being buried here. You're sending me back to Ghana. That's what both of my parents have said. Like, they're not going to be buried here. But for me, I would be.
It's funny you say you asked your mum that question, because, there's been loss in my family. And I remember at the funeral, the pastor said, into everyone in the church, talk to your family now about what you'd want to happen when you are to pass. He says, let somebody know. So there's, to avoid this kind of, or where do we go? What, to the family discussion, like you were saying, Annette, that comes afterwards, and the politics of all. What did he actually said, plan your funeral now and tell somebody what you want to happen. Wonder, I don't know, Jackie, I can't quite remember the discussion on death. Is it the celebration of death, or is it just it being talked about? Because I definitely think that definitely we do live in a society where you don't talk about those things, where it feels like a bit of a taboo subject. I wonder if in other societies or communities or cultures, whatever the correct term is, there is a willingness to have those conversations a bit more.
I think maybe it's taboo in this, because I have a lot of conversations with my father about death. My mum's buried in Uganda, and I've always said that I want to be buried next to my mum. But my father's from a different town, and we have this argument. He's saying, he's sending my body to buried with next to his parents and all of that. And I'm like, no, I'm going to come back and haunt you if you do that. When I see my father, every week he's going to some kind of funeral. So death is very much part of life. And in the book, I guess what she's trying to say is that the travesty of death is that we don't. I think there's a quote about not living life well. Can't remember the title of the book, where she says that the person had died and then the guy was really sad that the person had died. But actually the person that he was speaking to was saying, actually, that's not why you should be sad. The reason you should be sad is because the person did not live life well. So I think what she's trying to say is that we spend so much time running around like headless chicken. And actually, it's the quality of our life that should be important. And alongside saying how much money people spend on funerals and all of that, I found the story of the guy who was in hospital and whose family refused to pay for his hospital bill. Or when the doctor told them that he died, they'd collected all the money and, went to pay it. And then realized that actually the doctor had lied to them. The doctor had lied to them. And so they kind of wanted their money back. So I found that quite funny. But for me, it kind of does illustrate how much, I guess, we don't value people's lives. When they're alive, and yet we really mourn them when they die. And now everybody's really morbid and
no. I think you've done a good job taking us through this this one, Jackie. The compliments weren't rolling off the tongue, so you've I felt your pain at some times, but you kept us going.
I think I'm quite surprised Taiwo did not come much stronger, because Taiwo really liked the book.
I did enjoy it. Despite all its flaws and imperfections, I did enjoy it.
Do you think because you're a guy, that might be why you enjoyed it, or you saw something more in it?
That may well have played a role.
Was this yourself and Carl in the big discussion, wasn't it? And I'm just trying to remember what Carl thought. He wasn't particularly impressed either.
Yeah, he was.
So gender doesn't mean anything.
I think it was a Taiwo thing. And possibly...
I think Uchenna liked it.
And possibly the pictures in the book, because I think you were quite taken in by the pictures and the whole...
The aesthetics of the book, the idea, the potential, even though it was not fully realised, or maybe not well realised. It adds to the conversation, though, doesn't it?
Does it?
It does.
I don't know that it does.
It didn't detract from the conversation. I just think she's on a religious journey, and she's trying to find something, and she's taking us along for the ride.
And so do you think that she's decolonized her body?
I think she needs to maybe, as someone has said, decolonize her mind before she decolonizes her body.
As you can hear, we found this book really, really challenging. If you've read it and enjoyed it or have a different take on it, we would really love to hear from you. Really, really like to hear a different view if we've missed something or if we're just not reading it right. Drop us a line at hello@bookandlounge.com, or you can find us on Twitter, on Instagram. Just look for Book and Lounge 8. So then, out of 5, how would you rate it and would you recommend it? And Annette, we already know that you're 2.5.
That's high for Annette.
I'm trying to bring it down to 2, but it's okay. 2.5 is fine.
I guess you're not going to recommend it.
No, I actually wouldn't. No, sorry. If I had to recommend it, it would have to be on, like, I have to tell them I read something in this book, but literally just read pages this to this, because I couldn't give the whole book to somebody, but because of how it is just no structure. I'd have to tell them specifically where to read, and therefore I just don't think there'd be any point in recommending it. But again, if it was like a blog piece, I could just send a link or something. That's what she should have done. But yeah.
Well, I gave it 2.5 before, and I'll stick to 2.5. Yeah, I'd only recommend it if it was somebody, and for some reason I thought there were particular issues that they would find of interest.
I'm going to recommend it to all my middle class friends.
Why not your working class friends?
Because it would be beyond them. 3 out of 5. And I recommend it because the notes reasonably comprehensive. And I think it's like a gateway book. It can whet your appetite to other authors and other sources of material. So even if you do not find it particularly helpful, it can open up your mind to, other material.
Yvonne?
1 out of 5.
Whoa.
Whoa.
I mean, honestly, this is,
That's hard. That's hard, Yvonne.
no, this has been such a traumatic experience for me. And actually, the reason why and the more I've discussed it with everyone now, because I thought it was just a me thing, and no, and I'm giving it 1 because you can see that it's been well researched. She has done some research, but she's done nothing with the information that she has. It's not coherent, no. So, and I think this is probably the worst rating I've ever rated a book, but that's where we're at. It's a bit of a wake-up call for her. If she plans to do a 3rd book, then she needs some help and guidance, and not people that pander to her because of her status.
That's what I think happened. There's no editing, little editing. They just said, it's Afua, she can do it. Let's not tell her what to do. And then this is what's happened. But if this was an essay or a dissertation, I personally think someone would be marked down because there's no structure at all.
Yeah, I think I first gave it a 3, and I think I was probably trying to be too nice, be generous, but I'm going to go down to 2.5 for all the reasons that have been said. I think that's where I really think it is. And I was just going back to the acknowledgements, and she says in the acknowledgements, my work often infuses journalism with more personal storytelling, and this book is no exception. So that point about it being a blog post that somebody's just put together and turned it into a book, I think that that seems truer now that I've just reminded myself of those words. And if you want to see name dropping, actually go through those acknowledgements. They might not necessarily be famous people, but the people she's like going through and naming in here, some pretty like well-connected folk. Yeah. I don't know what point I'm trying to make there. Yeah.
The point you're trying to make is that you're jealous.
I totally am. I totally am. I wish I had a bunch of BBC friends who would pay me to go to Ethiopia to make a programme. Oh, I wouldn't mind. I've got a few briefs. I'll pitch to them. I'll even present for a reduced fee. But yeah. Yeah. Good for her. It didn't connect, but yeah, everyone should be allowed to indulge in, right? Non-connected.
So Jackie, what are your marks?
I can't remember what I gave it, but I'll give it a 3. The reason why I give it a 3 is because actually there's a lot in there that is useful information. It's just unfortunate how she's put it together. Actually, no, I'm going to go back to 2.75. I don't think he deserves a 3 because of how disjointed it is. There's a lot of really useful information in there. There's a lot of research that's gone into it. I loved learning about the Queen of Sheba. I loved learning about that church in Ethiopia. But they did not belong to this book. They just did not belong here. If she'd put all of that history in another book, that would have been a great book. But because she's tried to shoehorn all of that information into this one, I just don't think it's very well done. And yeah, would I recommend it? Yes, I would. I think that there are a lot of people that would actually pick this up and still gain a lot from it, from reading it, and still learn a lot from reading it. So I'll be selective about who I would recommend it to, but I would still recommend it. So yeah.
I would recommend them not to get the Kindle, to, if they can't afford it, borrow it, get it from the library, and you get the pictures as well.
Okay, well, that was interesting.
Gosh, and I've just seen it on eBay because I would happily give this away. Someone is selling it for £75.
Wow,
that's atrocious.
They're signed limited editions, first edition.
Signed copy
or something.
It's pre-owned. I don't know what the fuss is, but obviously they haven't read it themselves. Yeah. But maybe they've read it and they're really happy with it.
Maybe.
But that's more than the cover price, though, isn't it? It's only 20 quid. Well, only, but I mean, it's 20 quid.
Can we talk about Donald Trump's assassination attempt now, please?
I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please leave us a comment on... Sorry. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please leave us a comment on Spotify. Let us know what you thought of the book. Let us know what you thought of the discussion. And please don't forget to spread the word and share the podcast with your friends, your family, and anybody who you think is interested. Till next time, goodbye.